Welcome to Kümneger Talks. I'm your host, Selam Abebe. Today's podcast is titled Yewendoch Guday, Masculinity, Subjectivity, and Well-Being. Join us as we explore these topics and more from the perspectives of Habesha men.
I mean, honestly, I think we've talked about this. You both mentioned the data was so rich, it was so engaging to look over what people had, to comment on. So maybe just by starting to ask each one of you, what does it mean for each one of you to be Habesha and male growing up in Canadian society?
I think, growing up, coming from like any country and any like national identity, coming into a different identity or a different country, and then like trying to reconcile those two things, I think is the same for everybody. So as a Habesha man, that was still a common experience where, I came to Canada when I was 6, so young enough that I could still kind of like really absorb Canadian culture and like, assimilate, quote unquote assimilate, but old enough that I still had memories and an understanding of like where I came from physically and like what that looked like and what that world was like. So I think it was like trying to navigate those two things, trying to like fit into, your environment, whether like that was school or whether it was work, but like finding out like what does it mean to be a part of this like society, and figuring that out, I think, was a part of that experience.
Thank you. Can I ask how old you were when you first moved here?
6. So I came in December 15, 1996.
Right.
We know the date. Yeah, we talk to me like not every year, but sometimes my dad or my mom will call and be like, "Oh, today's the day we came." So
that's awesome. So awesome. So you came like smack in the middle of winter.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So definitely there was that like winter shock for sure. Canadian.
Yeah.
Selam was actually there at the airport when we came. She greeted me.
Exciting.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I remember asking Lealem, I don't know how I remember this, but as like a child, I remember asking Lealem how he knew how to speak English. And he told me he learned on the plane. And I was so intrigued by that comment. I was like, wow, that's so nice. Like,
such a Canadian thing to do, Selam. Such a Canadian thing to do.
I don't know why I lied. I don't know if I was just being like sarcastic or cheeky, but like I was like, yeah, I learned on the plane. I don't know why.
You said it in English or in Amharic?
I don't remember.
No, because we grew up speaking both languages, so I might have said it in Amharic or in English, but yeah.
That's such a Habesha response to Lealem.
I was just gonna say that's such a Habesha response. 100%. That's something I would say fresh off the boat. Be like, yeah, I just learned, just trying to be funny.
Quick comeback.
I think for me it was like I had so much pride. I came here when I was 9. I had so much pride when I first came in, and I didn't realize it. And then I think over time, what ended up happening is I started losing that pride, and I didn't realize it's not. I wouldn't even say it's a bad kind of pride. Like, I felt like I was better than everyone, but I just knew where I came from, and it was just like I belonged to a certain culture and I had an identity. I didn't really connect that and realize that until I traveled to Colombia, and I was like in an area where it's predominantly Black people. And I like, there's something in the back of your mind that, I don't know if you guys have ever gone somewhere that's predominantly Black, and it's just, you feel like I don't know, like your guard can be down. Like it wasn't even a nice neighbor, like it wasn't even a nice area. It was the hood in Cartagena, and I was like, I felt so comfortable because everyone I looked at was Black, and I think that's what it was when I first came. But I didn't realize that's what it was until much later. But 100% agree with you.
I felt like growing up Habesha male in Canada there was like this intricate balance that that I always, tried to maintain with what values that I obtained from my country of birth versus Ethiopia.
Yeah, so like Johannes, I was born here too. I'm Ethiopian and Eritrean. I definitely having that like identity and like strong culture at home definitely, to you guys' point, gave me that sense of belonging. But the interesting part of growing up in Canada with that was at home, obviously, I'm Eritrean Ethiopian, but outside, I'm just Black. So that was interesting to navigate, especially as a child, because you notice that your Congolese friends, your Haitian friends, you're all from different parts of the world with different cultures, but you're all being treated the exact same. So there is kind of like a unity there, and like an understanding of the social dynamics just from how you and your friends are being treated. But also there is, to you guys' point, a sense of like pride and belonging and like confidence that's deeply rooted because you know your culture. So even though the first time I went to Ethiopia was when I was 15, prior to that, it's as if I was in Ethiopia the whole time because the food, the history, everything was the language, it was all around me growing up, weddings at home, you know, my family. So yeah, that for me would be like the Habesha meal experience in the Canadian context.
Yeah, I think just to add on to what Johannes and Mikias were saying, like I as well was born and raised here, and it's funny because when I was younger, I didn't realize where, like even though my first language was Amharic, like speaking at home, like it wasn't until I went to school and was around like other kids that I picked up English. But even beyond that, like I didn't realize how different my upbringing was from other kids. Like the connection, I guess, to my identity and my roots didn't really kick in until I was more mature. And I mean, maybe you can put that up to just being a kid and like being innocent, but knowing that and coming to terms with that and realizing, yeah, I have this special part of my life and my identity that's like me. While outside of the house, like some people, I wouldn't say don't have that, but it would look a lot different for people that weren't Habesha or weren't from another country, like maybe second, third generation Canadians, like to say. But I do relate a lot to what Mikias and Johannes were saying. Like I feel like that shift comes like when you're more mature, like growing up here, you realize like how much of a big role being Habesha has in your identity. So I can relate to that a lot, yeah.
I want to delve a little bit into that, sort of what you said, Elia, which touches on what everybody else has been saying so far, which is the being a Habesha part, if I may put it that way, sort of starts to kick in later on when you're more mature, right? But before we get to that, I was wondering if we could just maybe, as a group, have a conversation about what that growing up looked like. So what was that laying of that foundation that then kicked in later on when you were much mature, right? Look like? Because Mikias, you talked about it too, because you were like, you know, at home you were being raised Ethiopian and Eritrean, and both cultures were very much alive in the household.
Yeah.
But when you left the house, your Haitian Congolese friends, in spite of the fact that you come from different places or your ancestors come from different places, and you're all culturally diverse and vibrant, you were being treated as the same as Black, so to speak, right? And so what was that like, that sort of rearing in the household for you with your parents? What was the day-to-day like? What was sort of the points of convergence and divergence when you were sort of leaving the house and going to school and coming in and out and so on and so forth?
I can speak to me personally on that. The big was just like more, it wasn't like physical things I say, but it's more like a lot of it was storytelling. So like as a kid, I feel like for any, like you read children's books, whatever, you hear stories and then you have heroes that come from those stories and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd say probably like my uncle probably played the biggest role in this, but you'd always hear these stories and legends and stuff about, let's say Lealem was speaking earlier, like kings and queens and whatever, or religiously, like 1,000 this many years ago, this person came, established this, we've been doing this for millennia, et cetera, et cetera. Your ancestors built this out of like a stone or something, and it's lasting till now. So like all these like, and some of it could be like fiction too, but just like little things like, I don't know, like before I even like go there and see it, like my dad would be like, oh, like where I'm from, he's like, you don't have to go to the grocery store to like buy like meat. He's like, you just like, the cows are in your backyard, you just go, you like slaughter. And it's like, as a kid, it like seems stupid now, but like it just created this like fascination of like, whoa, there's like this different place, like you know what I mean? Which kind of was it was constantly at odds with the perception of Ethiopia from a Canadian context of like, let's say, oh, poverty, let's the UNICEF $1 a day for this kid that doesn't have anyone to support him or whatever. Like but then at home, that was constantly being combated by historical, mythical, and religious, I would say, stories and teachings and indoctrinations that kind of, and it wasn't at the age where you'd like fact check or anything like that, right? It was just like, you just start, and then you just feel like, oh, I'm Ethiopian. I'm like I said earlier, at the very least different, but a certain stage is superior. So then anytime there was either temptation or like later on as you get older, where you start to like, I guess, differentiate, okay, there's this thing's in front of me. If I act in this manner, that is not staying true to my Ethiopian values versus, okay, let me stay true to my Canadian values, etc. You start to like rationalize that. And then what I would say is that's what I leaned on, basically, all those stories and stuff and the everything that I guess I was indoctrinated as a kid allowed me to like make decisions on a case-by-case basis that were more in line with my Ethiopian sides and values. And then in that sense, I guess I started to realize that, oh no, I am more Ethiopian than I am Canadian, or vice versa if I did make the decision on the other side of the coin. So that's what I'd say my foundation was.
I remember grass on the floor when there's like a buna or whatever. That's you know, I'm like, that's different. You don't see that in some of your other friends' house, like you're, you know, growing up in like, you know, we grew up in like, was it Richie, right? The hood or Selam, and a lot of Somalian friends, a lot of you know, Asian friends, and you don't see that. That's not, you know, that was actually just bringing back memories. Drinking buna, injera mallet.
Yeah,
It's different.
yeah.
Mom making different types of, your parents making like different types of like different foods. Not eating out was not much.
Now that you mention it, a big one for me was eating with your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything and everything, eating with your hands. Like even sometimes at lunch at school when I was younger, people would look at me so funny, but I was just so used to it, you know. That's just what we did. Yeah.
The smell of shinkut on your clothes when you like go
Oh,
to the
that's the biggest one too. Yeah.
Oh my God, that one's the best. My sons have a story about that I will never be able to live down. High school memories. They called me and they were having a hernia because of that. I still die of laughter every time. I was like in tears because they were like, how? But when we were growing up, it's just the norm, right?
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, day to day, I think a lot of these things. Anyways, for me, it was like I had a lot of things,
Yeah.
I guess. I mean,
I,
yeah.
I was just gonna bounce off what you guys are saying about like, I feel like when your school environment or like the environment outside of the home is obviously not Habesha, it's not Ethiopian, it's not Eritrean, like you're confronted with like the contrast of it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, they don't eat with their hands. Oh, their clothes don't smell like shunkurth. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that makes you realize, oh, right. And it kind of brings you back into the fact that like, oh, I'm a stranger in this land. Like, this is not my home. And then you're trying to also figure out like what that means for you and fitting in. Like, I was thinking about the fact that if I was a bit older when I came to Canada, like how different would my with my like childhood have been. Like I think about that often. Like I was 6, so it was like maybe grade 1. Like grade 1 is when I started in Canada, but I always kind of see other people or like other friends I know that are Habesha that came a little bit later in life, and I feel like they were able to maybe maintain a little bit more of like not just the identity, but like what that looked like at, you know, in a high school setting, or like what it meant to be Habesha at that age. Like I had no conception beyond the age of 6. And so, yeah, sometimes that's something that I think about too, that like when you come makes a completely different experience for you in terms of like the socialization or like forming the identity or being aware that it's so different than white people and other Black people around you. So yeah.
How did you navigate it, Lealem?
Yeah.
Do you have how you did that?
You know, I think I was lucky enough that my school and my like where I grew up was very diverse. I grew up in a very diverse like neighborhood. Lucky enough to grow up in a very diverse like elementary school and high school. So I think for me, it wasn't so much that I was like confronted with like being, yeah, I think my upbringing was more about like, there was obviously like the shimkurt and the food and like, oh, your food smells weird. What is that? Or what is that like, what is that sponge, like gray sponge material in your food container? Like it was more that was there, but it was also, I think, yeah, like figuring out like who am I as a Black person among my friends, and like maybe leaning into that. Like I danced, I was super into hip hop, and I think back on that as like, oh, was I like a token Black guy in my circle, or you know, was that just did that just happen to be the things I was interested in, you know? And so I did that, you know, like that's a weird thing I think about when it comes to like high school and stuff. But I don't think I was thinking that much about like the difference of being Habesha, because one thing I was gonna say is that like I had like my church community, which was so deeply Habesha that I think that gave me like the reassurance of like, this is what your identity is on a consistent like weekly basis. And I think if I didn't have like a faith community that was like an ethnic faith community, maybe that difference with that like that feeling of like, oh, am I Habesha, am I not? Like, what does that mean? Would have been maybe more stark or been different. But I think like the church, you know, is the congregants all speak in Amarinya, like having that, I think built my language, maintained it. I think if I didn't have that, I probably would have forgotten a lot of Amarinya. I probably wouldn't be able to speak it. So I do think back on how like those things impacted that, like where I grew up, what school I went to, but also the fact that I had like a yeah, like a pretty rich community, you know, at least through like the faith community that was like consistent, that was very Habesha. And like maybe the youth were figuring out what it meant to be like Habesha Western, you know, faith people, but there was still that identity there. So
Guy, where do you land with this? Because I know you said you came in at 9.
Yeah, it's actually amazing to hear like such positive experiences from everyone, because mine wasn't that at all. It was actually completely like the opposite. I would say. I think it's mainly because I was like being in London. It's predominantly Ferenc or Sada for you know whoever people. So because of that, it wasn't very accepting. Like I didn't feel comfortable bringing injera because I was like, I didn't want to like be singled out. I just wanted to eat my food and be you know, chill, whatever.
Yeah, I never.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are saying. That's crazy. To me, I would have been like, my dad would be like, yo, that's another thing too. Like I was in a single parent household. So my dad would be like, oh, like, and I love my dad's cooking. He'd make something and I'd be like, oh no, I'm not taking that. There's no way I'm taking that. Like it is like amazing food. I love it. But I'm like, no, I'm not eating with my hand in front of these people. There's no way. So yeah, for like, I don't even think ever I've taken injera to like, unless I'm going to like a restaurant to like, obviously at that point, whatever, I'll get whatever injera food, but I've never packed injera food That's a lot until work, like maybe 6 years ago, like, you know, that's when I was like, I don't even care, whatever. And that's like when people were more accepting. So yeah, that's amazing to hear from my end.
I know exactly what you mean, like, because like when I was younger, like it was not until we were in a very diverse community when I was up until like about grade school.
Yeah.
And up until grade school, you know, smelling Shinkurts and you know, all this, it was okay, you know.
Yeah.
It was not until I went to like a predominantly white high school that it changed, because I went like right around like grade high school.
Yeah.
It completely changed.
It's
Or maybe
different.
it was the age too, but
Nah,
also
man, it's
because of the predominantly white.
100%. I think now Canada has become a lot more accepting, I would say. Like, not publicly, but like privately, I would say, even like in small niche areas. But I don't remember London being like that at all. Like, it was very much like, you know, you had to fit a certain culture or identity, which left me kind of like, I don't know, I was just very confused. Like, I didn't know. I felt like I had two identities. I had an identity outside of home, and then I had an identity at home. But yeah, even the Shinkur thing, I'm like, it's funny that you guys are laughing about it. Me, I was putting towels underneath the door, making sure nothing, you know, my dad would be cooking. I'd be like, close the doors, man, please. Like, what are you doing? Please, for the love of God. Yeah, man, it was rough. Yeah, so it's amazing to hear you guys like laugh about it. But for me, it was like, oh my days. And I would like hide my clothes, so make sure that my bag would be in my room in the closet, closed up, windows open. I don't even care.
Sure I did that too.
I'm like, no, wait, no, you're not gonna get me.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people would agree with you on that, actually. I would.
Yeah.
And I can think of, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. My cousin, she was like that. She would, even the bunna.
Yeah.
When the bunna was being made, she would like close her door, a towel, open up all the windows.
100%.
She would put on shash because the hair can't catch it.
100%.
So I think a lot of people would actually resonate with what you're saying, in that sense.
Yeah. And I think also not having a lot of Habeshas to look up to. I don't think it was until much further on, like maybe late high school, that I started realizing there's some like well-accomplished Habeshas to look up to. But yeah, being in London, I think there's like in London at the time, there's maybe like 100 Black people and 50% of them were Jamaican. Like, you know what I mean? And like maybe 10% were Habesha. So it wasn't like, I don't know, for me, it was easier for me to identify with like Middle Eastern people. It was like Lebanese people. It was easier for me to identify with Jamaican people more than it was with Habesha people, because I didn't see that growing up. So a lot of times, like the friends that I had, I mean, elementary school, there wasn't a lot of diversity there, but even then, like my best friend was from like Iran or something like that. It was like, I don't know, I didn't really have a lot of Habesha friends growing up. So for me, it was very conflicting, very conflicting.
Can I ask when you moved here and what part of London?
I moved here when I was 9. Sorry, go ahead.
Like when was that? The 90s?
Oh, my bad. That was no, I lied. That's a lie. 2004. I almost said the year I was born. 2004, yeah. And it was, in terms of area, I lived in Riverside, which is like, I don't know if yeah.
Don't worry, I know London the back of, like, I got curious because I moved here 10 years before you, and I can attest to the fact it was far less diverse then. So when you're saying these things, I'm like, in my head, I'm trying to picture what areas you're in.
Yeah, Riverside did not have any Black people. No. I was every time I would see a Black guy in the street, I'd be like, yo, what, you're here too? Like, what's I didn't know. I had no idea.
You mean like walking through Springbank Park and looking around and you see every other ethnicity but your own? Yeah, I remember that. I grew up near that area, so I totally remember that.
Yeah, 100%. And then I moved to King Edward, like Cleveland area, which is like the completely different area. It's like the complete opposite. And then that's when I started like identifying with the people that I started seeing, which was very dangerous because it's not a very nice neighborhood. But it was the people that I can identify with more than Riverside.
No, I was going to say that's one of the things that we're, it came up also through the study in questions. It's like where you grew up, where you went to elementary school, who resided in who really influenced your identities, as you're saying during this call. So that's another interesting part, right? Is the ways in which settlement happens in Canada and Canadian cities, because it's so diverse across the country. But, like a guy, when you're talking about your experiences in London, Ontario versus, when Lealem was talking about his, or there are certain commonalities, but then there are these geographical differences that make a huge difference. So, I mean, maybe if you guys can touch up a little bit upon that, right? Like it's, did you transition from one area to another? And did that influence the ways in which you, I guess, as from what you're saying, because you've touched upon it all, each of you in one way or another, but in what ways did it influence how either you adapted more strongly with your Habesha side or kind of downplayed it a little bit more when required?
For me, both elementary and high school and university, to be honest, there was always like a lot of Black people. But in terms of my Habesha side, when I was about 11, I think I started going to church like very consistently, like more than even just Sundays, like multiple times a week. And so that period where I was really going to church, it was the Habesha church. So I think that period, my Habesha identity, so to speak, I think was reinforced because all my friends from church are Habesha. They all speak Amarinya fluently, and so I was more immersed in the culture during that time, especially during like formative years. I'm in my preteens. So yeah, I would say that environment was like a plus for my Habesha side, but then outside, just my overall identity as a Black man was it followed me everywhere. Like I never was in a place where it was like all Ferenc people really. So yeah,
Must be nice.
yeah.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of like the opposite of that. Like when I up until like first grade, I was living in like Ottawa. People probably know the area, like Demorier, like that area, like near. Yeah, you know it. So I at the time, like of course, I was too young to really, understand, what part of the town that was and like the characters that were in that area. It was not a nice area for those that don't know. But so from first grade on, like the formative years, like grade school and all that, I was in a very, very white area at the time, Barhaven. I think, Selam, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong. Like within our like small circle of the community, like our families were like one of the first to kind of move to that area. But I think moving from first grade on, just being around like white people so often, like outside of like Sundays, right? Like so guy kind of touched on it a little bit. Like there was a very clear kind of divide between like, okay, Sundays I'm comfortable, I'm around like, my people. Like I before I even understood how like integral being Abisha was in my identity, like I could always distinctly feel that divide. Like I'm at school, I'm with white people. This is acceptable. This isn't acceptable. I have to do things this way. I can't do things that way. Whereas Sunday or whatever there was going on the weekends or even some days, weekdays, whatever, it was relaxed. Like I felt at home, comfortable. Things made a lot more sense. But beyond that, I think it really does have an effect, like geographically speaking, I mean, like on your identity and how you kind of connect with at least for us, the Abisha side of who you are. But yeah, I feel like if I was living in that area, de Maurier and yeah, Richie Ramsey, like that whole area, if I was there for longer than when I left first grade, then I don't know. I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what kind of person I'd be, but it would definitely be different for sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna bounce off that. Yeah, this is what I was afraid of on the webcam, is that the sun, I'm in the basement and the sun is like coming right in, so it's like
looks cool, bro.
So high contrast.
Yeah,
Looks cool, man.
You're just sparkling.
You're
That's good.
glowing.
You're glowing, exactly. There you go. That's some Vaseline.
Publish
There you go.
identity. Yeah, no. No, what I was gonna say is like, yeah, I relate to what Ilya was just saying in that, like, I think everything that I was saying earlier was true up until we also moved with my family out of Du Maurier government housing projects into Barrhaven, which was suburb, like affluent suburbs. I don't know about affluent, but like middle class suburbs. And
Middle class.
yeah. And I think that was the same time that I was joining, that I started university. And so also a bigger kind of like less diversity than my high school. So I think those things kind of coincided with a little bit more tension in that, like, so I can understand that too. I definitely felt that divide. And I think university, or like that age, is a time where people start to like, they understand, like they start to conceptualize like systems, you know what I mean? Or like the idea that like you exist in this thing that was created by people intentionally to serve certain purposes, you know, sometimes for your benefit, sometimes not. And I think that's when I started like my own kind of racial awakening, or like awakening of my own consciousness as like, as a Black man, as a Habesha man, and like what that meant for like my place in society, like my access to certain resources and stuff like that. And I think it's funny, we were talking about like growing up in the hood, like I think I started to like better understand what my like diverse upbringing really was, you know what I mean? Where like, oh, this is like understanding policing, for example. It was after university that I had actual instances with police that I would describe as being racial profiling, or like actual, like, you know, racial discrimination that I would experience. And I think I started to like conceptualize my diverse upbringing as like a positive, like understanding that like those areas that are like kind of obviously labeled as bad, really what causes that is like underfunding, under-resourcing, like, you know, the fact that they're way more over police. Like I grew up in Du Maurier seeing police like every single day, but in Barrhaven, I never saw police. Like I never saw them turn the corner there, but I saw them everywhere there, you know? And so like starting to like question what that meant, you know, does that mean people in Du Maurier or Old Hood were more criminal? Probably not. It just means that they were being policed more. It means they were surveilled more. It means that there was like more of that happening, right? And obviously the fact that that was more Black and brown people living there wasn't just a coincidence, right? So I think I started to understand that a lot later in life, but when I was growing up, they would be those like little microaggressions, but I didn't know where to place them. I didn't know what they really meant. I didn't have a good sense of like what that was. They were just weird, uncomfortable things, but I didn't really understand like how to fit them in any kind of like framework until I was a bit older and I understood, you know, certain definitions, or started to understand like, oh, history, you know, whether it's like, you know, the Black struggle, or the Habesha struggle for, you know, independence, or for, you know, their own freedom against, you know, colonial forces and stuff like that. I feel like it was a bit later in life, but also when I was surrounded by more white people, that I started to understand like really what that meant, like what Canada really was. And so I think that was yeah, that's something that just came to my mind when we're talking about like moving out of those like neighborhoods that are way more diverse into outside of it. Like that's when you feel the tension more. That's when you feel like yeah. And sometimes like that's also when you like, I don't want to say you're more conscious, but like that's when you kind of start to understand things a little bit deeper. So at least, yeah, that was my experience.
It's funny like how there's so many. I know Eliab for sure, but I didn't know Lealem was in Ramsey too. And then we all moved to Barrhaven around. I think I was like grade 3, if I'm not mistaken, when we moved. But probably around the same time as Eliab. It's probably like I don't know. Like I feel like there's things like in Habesha where we're like, I guess it's not a bad thing, but like we copy each other in a sense. If one person does something, then like the next family does it, and the next family, and it's like we all end up in Barrhaven for some reason. It's pretty funny.
True.
But yeah, I would say it was like I said earlier, it was always like that distinction between me and them and me. There was always there. I feel like initially, like even though it was a predominantly white neighborhood in Barrhaven, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, like grade 6-ish, up to about there, I didn't really like it was like I knew I was different, but it didn't like prevent me from interacting or forming friendships or anything like that from let's say the majority white population. But when I look back now, like when especially into like high school and stuff, um, there might be like 200, 250 people in your grade, and then but like my 5 closest friends or like people that like if I look back now, who do I still talk to? Somehow like they're 99% like ethnic somehow. They're either Ethiopian, they're Arab, they're Indian, whatever, like they're somehow. So I don't know why, but I feel implicitly there must have been something in me that I guess I definitely had more I related more with them being I guess from like an immigrant family or something, that there were just more things that we had in common that I guess allowed those friendships to kind of last a bit longer. So I guess in high school is when I would say like I started making I guess conscious decisions to affiliate myself more with the ethnic community than the predominantly majority white community, even though I made the move a bit earlier in like grade 3.
Can I ask if your recreational activities had anything to do with that? Like, were you engaged in sports? Did they put you, or like, were you doing organized sports, team sports?
Yeah, so I played football growing up, like so like I moved, in grade 3, and then like I just joined football. I think I was like 10 years old, and then basically played all the way to grade 12. And then I played on school basketball teams, not like organized, but on school teams. There were a solid mix of ethnic and white people on those teams. And I always had a good relationship with all of them. It's just like when I look back now, the people that I was closest with, and I feel like I had more, I was more related with, more in relation with, and people that I still to now like 29 now, which is 10 years, so 11 years past grade 12. And if I give you like the 5 or 6 or 7 people that from like John McCrae that I still like interact with, they're pretty much all non-white people. So I'm like, how did that happen type of thing? I haven't put much thought into it yet, but I assume it's because I affiliated more with the non-white population in high school.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like when you're in an environment where you are trying to cling to things that you relate to, it's more often than not going to be with like ethnically diverse people, right? Like I feel like that was my experience too. Like I can almost say, like we went to the same high school, so it was pretty much the same for me. Like the people that I still interact with are like non-white, and they're ethnically diverse. So definitely relate to that for sure.
Question for Mikias, Johannes, Lealem. Did you guys went back home? And how did that change your perspectives? Like after you came, did you guys start acting differently? Did you guys change your perspectives? Like,
yeah, for me, it completely changed my perspective. Like I always tell people, it changed my life when I went, because prior to that point, the only place where I would see that many Ethiopians and like Ethiopian Eritreans in one place would be like either at church or at a wedding, or a funeral. But here it was literally everywhere I went, it was like that. So I was telling my mom, I remember when I was there, I was like, it's like everywhere I go, it's a wedding, because literally everyone's Habesha, So just seeing that, and then I, at that time too, I was starting to get into more like, I was starting to be intrigued by the whole social justice field and reading about Black history and things like that. And it made me think like, if history didn't play out the way it did, I would have grew up here, So I was like, wow, this is like the original, like where, if things didn't go the way they did, I was supposed to grow up here surrounded by people who look like me. There's like a million doppelgangers of mine. but yeah, but no, yeah. So just that visual aspect did a lot for me, and then also I also realized how much I grew up with the culture in Canada once I went there, because growing up here, I always used to hear like, "Oh, the injera back home, oh my god!" And then I went, and it was good, but I was like, tastes like what I eat at home, you know. So it was like things like that, and also just the culture. Like I'd go to relatives, places I've never been to, and it felt like I knew them for so long, just because the relatives I do have in Canada talk the exact same way. So it gave me that perspective. And then lastly, another part that really stuck with me was obviously there's a lot of poverty, and people's like they're like, I don't, for lack of better terms, like their hustle, their drive with how little they have was very inspiring, and it just made me realize how much opportunity I have here. Like, yes, I'm a black man in North America and all those things, but I'm not gonna get it twisted. I have a lot of opportunity here, especially with what they're left with over there. So those were the three ways that that trip really changed my perspective, and obviously meeting a whole bunch of family that I had never met before as well. So
Can I ask you to expand on that for a moment, if nobody else minds? Just that change of pace and lifestyle when you're talking about poverty and like being relative to what we have here in Canada, and talking about that, like, what did that mean for you in terms of looking around at, like, I guess, other Habesha males that you would come across in family? Like, how did that influence you? Was it just the welcome and hospitality, or did you notice like a structure in the system that's different from here about the way people are? Because a comment that you just made about the hustle really caught my ear.
Yeah, it was really like the people like that I was spending a lot of time with, my close relatives. I would spend the day with them sometimes and just run errands with them, and it was just so much, just like back to back to back, just different things, and it's so like the grind never stops, but like for real, for real. And I was noticing like when I'm here, I could literally in my sleep get a job and get 14 an hour. At that time too, the minimum wage had just gone from 11 to 14. So I remember thinking like, man, if they could make 14 Canadian an hour, the amount of work they would put in to get that is like crazy. And then I would just have to call, ask for a shift, go and do some cashier work. So it just made me realize like it's easy to kind of be semi lazy here and get by, right? But over there it's like, just to make ends meet, you have to be like what would be considered here as like a super like hard worker. So that perspective like definitely carried over with me, and gave me perspective on how I need to act. It's not to say that from one day to the next I became a super hardworking person, but it just gave me that perspective. It was more so on an interpersonal level. It wasn't so much systemic. It was more just seeing different individuals closely, seeing how hard they work, their lifestyle, and then obviously even when you drive by, you see like the living conditions of some people, maybe neighbors of a relative and things like that. And you're just like, man, and even relatives directly, and you're like, man, like we have it not easier, but yeah, easier, to be honest. We have it easier, and like just so much access, with way less effort. So it just gave me a lot of perspective.
For myself, so I've been 3 times. The first time I was, I think I was like 12 or 11. So not many, I wouldn't say not life changing, but they weren't too many memories that I would connect to having shaped my identity really. But the second time I went was right after I graduated. Yeah, right after I graduated university. And I can distinctly remember coming back and having such a like pride in knowing like these are my roots, like this is who I am. So much so that that divide that I was referring to earlier, and a guy touched on it, that started to shift, like to go away really. I had really started to kind of I'll give you like a concrete example, right? Growing up, I like white people would pronounce my name Eliab, like closer to like Elias or like Elijah, right? So they pronounce it that way. And then, yeah, my internship during university and like working part-time, like throughout high school, whatever, I was always referred to as alive, like outside of the Abisha community. And then, I don't know, like during that shift, I started to tell myself, that's not how people pronounce my name growing up. Like the people who are closest to me don't call me that. So why do I introduce myself as that? You know, like why do I? It seemed to me like it was a way to suppress my identity and suppress the Abisha-ness of me. You know, so that, just to give you an example, you know, that was kind of like a shift, I would say, and how I identified with my culture and my identity as an Abisha. But beyond that, though, there was also a sense of responsibility that was starting to build after that second trip, where there it was almost like a crying out that you need to have a forward thinking mentality for how you can give back to the people of Ethiopia in any way, a small way, big way, whatever the case may be. But from that point on, I was really kind of, it was on my heart to kind of do something in the community and try to build something, whether it's a business, whether it's a nonprofit, whatever the case may be. Because at the end of the day, like I had talked to this with one of my uncles too, where basically that idea of like us generating income here and then circulating it in the economy there, whether that's like a small thing like buying like coffee or whatever, it still in the long run makes a big difference, because now you multiply that by every diaspora that really generates a lot of revenue in the economy and stimulates the economy there too. So something small like that was really starting to shape my idea of what I want to do in the future. How do I kind of bring this part of my identity to the forefront of my day-to-day life? And yeah, and this third trip was like, I think it was like 3 months ago now, 4 months ago. That just like got me like, yeah, this is it. Like you have to be coming back as often as you can, refreshing this cultural bond with your identity. Yeah, it's been more and more impactful every time I went back. So yeah, that's my experience. Yeah.
I guess I'm lost here. For me, my first time I went, I was like 5, I think. So I was really young. I don't really have many memories. I feel most of my memories that I do have are like we first got one of those like handheld video cameras right before we went. I remember it was me and my mom, and I bet most of my, it's tough because it's like it's all like jumbled together now, but I suspect most of my memories are just from watching those tapes of me as a kid there, rather than my actual like vivid memories. But I guess I knew it existed. Like it wasn't they weren't just stories, or it helped me believe in the stories because I knew like there was a physical place that I went to. Then that was my first time, and then I didn't go for like a long time. There was an opportunity for my aunt's wedding, but my mom and my sister went, and I decided not to go. I was probably around 12, 13 at the time, and I didn't go. And then the next time I went was after my first year of dental school. So I went to dental school in Western in London, Ontario. And after first year, I had, I guess, 4 months off or something. I'm going to Ethiopia. And then my mom didn't go. My uncle was living there at the time. And he used to live here, but he moved back. So I'm like, okay, I know he's there. He's not like doing anything like day to day. So he'll be able to like show me around and everything. And then I think it was a bit over a month, and we like literally just toured. I think I stayed maybe like 3 days in Addis Ababa when I first went there, and then we literally just started like busing to like different cities. I think we started like in Shoa, and then went to like Wallo and Gondar and Bahar Dar, like just like literally toured the whole, and just started seeing like historical sites, Laliwala, Tana, etc., etc. And then it just kind of just showed me like, well, like obviously I knew they were real, but like I actually like I went and I've been there, type of thing. So that helped And then my third time that I went was just in May. It was a short one. It was only for a week. It's my cousin's wedding. But it had been, I guess, like 5 years or so since the period of time before. So it was really short, but at least I got to see like friends, family, experience a wedding there. So that was fun. But so I'm not sure how much of a role. It definitely showed me that like I could see the struggle, just to reiterate some of the stuff you guys mentioned. The hustle that you were talking about, the poverty, like that was evident. Was that the reason why like I decided or will decide in the future to participate in improving the motherland type of thing? I don't think so. I think that was already instilled in me before I even went there, or maybe not before, but like going there did not add to that or much, I don't believe. I attribute it more, my grandma, I don't know like if anyone has the same experience, but my grandma used to come to Canada and like stay with us at home for a period of like a year at a time. And then she'd go back, live there for a year, come back here, live for a year type of thing. So maybe it's the same thing, but it's kind of like we kind of brought Ethiopia to like our house in that sense. So there was always like, not always, but like there was for a lengthy time, there was a period where I had someone from Ethiopia, literally, that didn't speak English, had no maybe or very limited understanding or concept of what it is to be like Canadian, or doesn't have many whose values or anything hasn't really shifted, because even my parents have changed, right, by living here for so long. So kind of like an organic Ethiopia was present in my house for a year at a time. She didn't go out to work, like she was always accessible every time I came home from school, the summers all day. So I would attribute a lot to her in terms of instilling a lot of Ethiopian values in me and kind of strengthening my bond. Because whenever she was there, I felt attached to her. I was always calling her at least once a month or so. And then the extended family, I guess, would be reached through her. But she was like the main reason, because she was the one person where I had like a really tight bond with due to the time we spent with each other here. And then I also contrast that with me and my cousins, for example, who she's their grandma too, but their inability to like converse in Amharic fluently with her was a big roadblock to kind of forming that bond with her. So then I compare myself to them, for example, and then I have a greater attachment to Ethiopia and Ethiopianness than them. And I feel my parents had a big role in that, because they taught me the language that allowed me to kind of converse with her, and then like, the story goes on, type of thing. So for me, I believe that more than me actually going to Ethiopia, bringing my grandma here, like bringing Ethiopia to me, actually played the bigger role in my affiliation with Ethiopia.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So, Guy, have you been back since you've been here?
No, I have not. No,
Why?
there's a lot of like family drama. There's a lot of family health that just kind of came up, and then I don't know. I just never, honestly, hearing this is like it's making my heart kind of hurt. I'm like, dang, like I'm like if anything, I actually went the opposite way. Even now, like I think I identify more as an African American than I do as a Habesha man, to be honest. Just because I'm not really surrounded by Habeshas. I'm not really like again, growing up, I didn't really have a lot of like Habesha role models to look up to. I felt like I related more with Middle Eastern like guys, or like I don't know, just black men that I don't know. It's kind of complicated, to be honest, but yeah. So for me, it's like hearing this, I'm going. But then again, there's parts of me that like I don't know. I smell bunna sometimes, or bun, and I'm like, and I speak Amaringa too, right? So it's like, and there's nothing like it. There's nothing like having a fresh like injera, and having some tips. Like there's nothing like it, and yeah, I'm just realizing from these conversations that, wow, I really miss that. Like, and it's like, it's ingrained in me too. Like, I love it. But yeah, it's just not around. I don't really see a lot of my culture, I guess.
Do you want to go back perhaps at some point?
I honestly, until this conversation, I think prior to hearing you guys talk about it, I would have said no. If that was the first question that I got. But now hearing this, I'm kind of going, maybe that's like, yeah, because like, again, like even with the name thing, imagine my name in a predominantly white or non-Habesha elementary school, high school, the whole thing. Imagine, bro. People see the spelling and they're like, how do you say that? They don't even try anymore, you know? It's like, I don't know, it's rough. So like every single time I introduce myself, it's Sagai, right? And I'm not even, like you said, Eliab, it's like I'm suppressing my identity and who I am. I don't know what my dad was thinking, give me that name. That's a little older, but it is what it is. But yeah, 100%. I'm from this conversation, I'm going like, man, I need to reassess that for
sure. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode titled Yewendoch Guday, Masculinity, Subjectivity, and Well-Being. The Kümneger Talks podcast has been brought to you by Selam Abebe, Mary Goitom, and Nassisse Solomon. Our theme music has been provided by the talented Lealem Abebe. Our sound design is the amazing Zeweldi, and all the artwork has been created by the lovely Dagmawit Worku.